Good guys are often best defined by the bad guys they fight. And if you grew up in the 80s, you know villains didn't get any badder than that decade's lineup. Whether you were a fanboy of the bony visage, the hairy or spiky, the ancient or ever living, evil came in every shape and form imaginable. That being said, it kind of felt like G.I. Joe phoned it in with their main baddie. No fangs, no glowing eyes, or ancient curse. Just a plain old chrome mask. But taking a long, hard look at that featureless mug, one might come to realize that maybe, just maybe, Hasbro was trying to tell us something by staring at that mirror like reflective surface. That is, perhaps, the real villain of G.I. Joe was you. Life is hard. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Despite all the blessings and good fortunes life can bring, it also has a nasty habit of throwing curveballs our way. But that's life, isn't it? We take the bad with the good. Still, there are moments when it feels like the bad starts to outweigh the good, when everything feels too hard to handle. It could be a series of unfortunate events or a single catastrophic one that sends your life into a tailspin. Sometimes it even drives you to do things you'd never imagine yourself doing. Take this used car salesman over here. Well, not this exact guy, but someone like him. Let's call him Rexford, or Rex for short. Now, despite the stereotypical smarminess that tends to stick to people in this profession, you could make a case that, hey, it's a living. Rex was just trying to get by, to provide for his wife and kid. But then one day something happened. See, Rex had a brother, let's call him Dan. And Dan was a Vietnam vet, a decent man by most accounts with one very human flaw. He liked to drink, and unfortunately, drive. And eventually, fate caught up with him. Dan was killed in a terrible car accident, and unfortunately, another car was involved. A family, a mother, a father, and their daughter. None of them survived. That tragedy shattered Rex's world. See, I forgot to mention, Rex wasn't just your average guy with average dreams. He was also deeply unhappy with the hand life had dealt him, with the system, with the world, with everything he thought that was keeping him down. And losing his brother in the way that he did, well, that was the final straw. While most people might mourn and try to move on, Rex couldn't. He took his brother's death as a sign, a call to action to fix the broken system he blamed for everything. He left his job, his home, and his family. Okay, actually, he did take his son with him. And Rex hit the road, traveling across America, preaching his twisted ideology and connecting with others who felt that same anger. And from nothing, he built something, a movement, a following, an army. A ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world, and at its head was Rex, who you could say took command of his new situation as the head of Cobra, a Cobra Commander. So, when Hasbro resurrected their long-dormant G.I. Joe brand from the 1960s in the early 80s, they made two crucial changes. First, they did a little downsizing, shrinking the original 12-inch soldier into a handier, dandier 3 3/4 inch scale, perfectly sized to compete with those other action figures from a galaxy far, far away. And second, they built a whole new world around them, a living, breathing universe populated not just by real American heroes, but also by some not so real American heroes, the bad guys, who rallied under one sinister banner, Cobra, the enemy. Now, at the start, the first wave of Joe toys were pretty lopsided. Only 2 single-carded Cobra figures hit shelves compared to the 9 Joes. And that's not even counting all the vehicles that came with Joe drivers. You got a Cobra officer and a lowly Cobra trooper for him to boss around. And that was it. But speaking of bosses, while Hasbro did make him, if you wanted the big boss man of Cobra, you had to work a little extra for him. Maybe it was a marketing move to build a little mystique around the character, or, I mean, let's be real, just a clever way to get kids to buy more toys. Either way, the original Cobra Commander wasn't available in stores. He was a mail-away exclusive. You had to collect a certain number of flag points, those little proofs of purchase printed on the figure and vehicle packages, cut them out, mail them to Hasbro, and then wait. Weeks, sometimes months, and finally one day a small package would arrive at your doorstep. Yes, kiddies, back in the day, we could have things delivered to our homes too, except it would take more than just a click. Anyway, if we're being honest, given the extra effort it took to acquire him, that original Cobra Commander figure wasn't exactly much to look at. Like, literally, a guy dressed head to toe in blue, sealed in a clear plastic bag, and armed with a single lonely pistol. To be fair, a good number of those OG Joes also came with a weapon, but still, to add to his plainness, he didn't even have a face, just a smooth, silver, featureless shield. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. I mean, this was a semi-grounded military toy, so it's not like Hasbro was going to make their main villain a mutated, multi-eyed, blue-skinned science guy. Oh wait. Okay, a little bit more on that later on. Anyway, one more thing that the Commander came with was his file card, and even that painted a fairly generic picture of your standard 80s bad guy, with stuff like absolute power and total control of the world as his main objectives. A fanatical leader that ruled with an iron fist. One that demands total loyalty and allegiance. This dude is hatred and evil personified. Corrupt, a man without scruples, and probably the most dangerous man alive. Fortunately, thanks to Hasbro's three-pronged approach to pushing G.I. Joe to the kiddies, toys, comics, and cartoons, we got to know Cobra Commander as more than just a plastic man of mystery. In 1983, Cobra Commander literally came to life in animated form with the very first G.I. Joe miniseries, The Mass Device, produced by Sunbow. And most significantly, we got to hear him for the very first time, brought to life by the late great comedian and actor Christopher Collins, better known as Chris Latta, who gave Cobra Commander that now iconic, high-pitched, raspy snarl that somehow managed to sound both menacing, conniving, and cowardly all at the same time. Given the decidedly lighter tone of the cartoons, this version of Cobra Commander leaned more towards comic villainy. He was still brilliant and dangerous, but also volatile, paranoid, and deeply insecure, lashing out at allies and enemies alike. He was the type of guy who'd build a massive Cobra temple deep in the mountains, ruling over terrified villagers through superstition and fear, and then turn around and unveil his latest doomsday contraption with dramatic flair, but zero foresight. From the previously mentioned mass device that could teleport his armies across the globe, to the weather dominator that could, well, dominate the weather, to the pyramid of darkness with which he managed to shut down half the planet's electricity, Cobra Commander's schemes were as over the top as his personality. Naturally, those big plans led to even bigger failures, and with every defeat, his credibility took another hit, even among his own troops. In fact, his reputation got so bad that after enough humiliating losses to G.I. Joe, his own inner circle decided they'd had enough. They didn't want a new leader, they wanted a better one. Tired of having just a Cobra Commander, they set out to create a Cobra Emperor. So in 1986, despite Cobra Commander's protests and his many sneaky attempts at sabotage, a new Cobra Emperor would quite literally arise. In his very own miniseries Arise, Serpentor Arise, the creation of Serpentor marked a massive turning point for Cobra. Suddenly, the commander found himself pushed aside, forced to play a role that felt very familiar to fans of Chris Latta's other iconic 80s villain, the Decepticon Starscream. Petty, conniving, and forever scheming to take back his position as top snake. From forming a secret cult of loyalists, a shadow faction within Cobra aligned with his vision of overthrowing the self-proclaimed emperor, to organizing a Mortal Kombat-style tournament deep in the jungles of the Philippines. Yes, apparently, we Filipinos have bluish-gray skin, to find the perfect assassin to eliminate Serpentor, which, in peak cartoon irony, turned out to be Sergeant Slaughter. And when that didn't work, he went big, like really big, as in summoning an ancient giant bug creature from the depths of the earth, big, all in one last desperate bid to squash his golden armored rival. Sure, every one of those plans failed spectacularly, but hey, say what you will about Cobra Commander, the man tried, and all those failures would finally come to a head in 1987's G.I. Joe, the movie. Looking to expand the G.I. Joe universe beyond the box and give Cobra a whole new origin story, Hasbro suddenly veered the franchise into full-blown weird science fiction, introducing the now infamous and polarizing Cobra-La, an ancient civilization of snake-like humanoids living beneath the Earth's surface, ruled by, well, what else? A half-man, half-snake dude named Golobulus. And here's the kicker. Apparently, Cobra Commander wasn't just your garden variety madman in a mask. He was one of them. Yup. Many years ago, the Commander wasn't a commander at all. He was a promising young blue-skinned scientist with a particular fondness for spores. Unfortunately, during one of his experiments, those same spores turned on him, horribly mutating his face. Fortunately for him, Golobulus saw potential in the poor guy. He gifted him a chrome-faced mask to conceal his new multi-eyed visage and sent him to the surface world with a mission: raise an army and lead Cobra's crusade to reclaim the Earth for Cobra-La. Out there? Absolutely. But I'll go on record and say I kinda like this weird new direction. Unfortunately for the Commander, this reunion with his old master doesn't go so well. It turns out that the creation of Serpentor was actually Golobulus' idea, a plan B meant to replace a leader who had in his eyes become a failure. And the punishment for failure? More spores. Cobra Commander is once again exposed to them. Hey, is this dude Filipino? Sorry, this time transforming him completely into a snake. Before his mind and body fully break down, he can only hiss out one haunting refrain: I was once a man. A tragic and tragically comic end for one of the most memorable villains of the 80s. Except, it wasn't. Turns out Serpentor wasn't quite the marketing success that Hasbro had hoped for. So the powers that be decided on a little course correction by bringing back the Commander in the next era of G.I. Joe cartoons, now produced by a new studio named Deke. Cobra Commander makes an improbable comeback. Restored from his snake form into a kind of snake-human hybrid, he returns wearing brand new battle armor to conceal his scaly exterior, and wastes no time reclaiming his throne. Overpowering Serpentor, the Commander turns the tables, hooking up the fallen Emperor to his newest contraption, the Pythonizing Ray, transforming Serpentor himself into an iguana. Yep, what comes around, goes around, I guess. But if you thought turning an Emperor into an iguana was wild, how about turning Transformers into humans? In the episode Only Humans, set in the far-off future of 2006, a mysterious, trench-coated figure called Old Snake helps a crime boss use stolen synthoid tech to transfer the minds of Rodimus Prime, Ultra Magnus, RC, and Springer into human bodies. It's never stated outright, but the clues are unmistakable. The raspy Chris Latta voice, the silver mask, the flash of blue uniform under the coat, and the mention of once leading a terrorist group. The episode ends perfectly with Old Snake raising his fists and croaking, "They don't make terrorists like they used to," before attempting to shout, "Cobra!" before succumbing to a hacking cough. Anyway, for all his faults and shortcomings, there's no denying how entertaining this version of Cobra Commander was. For many fans, this was the definitive take, but for older ones, the more iconic version of Cobra Commander came from the pages of the Marvel Comics, written by the man many consider to be the godfather of modern G.I. Joe, Larry Hama. Now, this Cobra Commander was a very different beast, less comedic, no grand sci-fi origin, no mutated multi-eyed blue-skinned scientist from a secret civilization. Instead, Hama's Commander had a more down-to-earth backstory. He was that used car salesman I mentioned earlier named Rex. Well, okay, he wasn't explicitly named Rex. That name comes from another version of the Commander that we'll get to later on. So, like I said, this Cobra Commander, or as his fans affectionately like to call him, Coco, had his story kick off with tragedy, the death of his older brother Dan, a moment that set him on the path to founding Cobra. You know, maybe I'm reading way too much into this, but I always thought that despite what it seemed, Hasbro did put more thought into their rather plain-faced Coco design. Given that his downward spiral was set off by a single tragic event, maybe Hasbro was trying to make a point that given similar circumstances, anyone could have found themselves in the commander's place. And that reflective mask drove the point home that maybe we could have been the enemy. Okay, enough of that self-over-reflection, yeah? So, there are two details in that story that I'd like to dig into. First, of course, is the accident that killed Dan, and another family along with him. See, Larry Hama was famous for weaving a pretty intricate web of connections between his favorite characters, and Coco just so happens to be linked to two of his best, Hasbro's budget cut turned cash cow Snake Eyes, and his ninja brother from another mother, Storm Shadow. So, that family in the crash, they were on their way to pick up their son, a soldier returning from Vietnam. You guessed it, Snake Eyes. And because of this tragic coincidence, Coco irrationally blamed Snake Eyes for his brother's death, setting him on a path of revenge. See if you can follow. Coco hired a saboteur named Firefly to kill Snake Eyes, who was then training in Japan with the Arashikage ninja clan under Storm Shadow's uncle, the Hard Master. But Firefly, despite being sorta ninja himself, decided he didn't want to mess with a whole clan and passed the job to Zartan, who was also sort of a ninja too. Larry Hama really loved his ninjas. Anyway, Zartan takes the shot, but accidentally kills the Hard Master, mistaking him for Snake Eyes since the old man had been imitating his heartbeat. Storm Shadow gets blamed after Zartan uses one of his arrows, and he leaves the clan to hunt down the real killer, which eventually leads him to join Cobra, where his ninja skills earns him the role of Coco's personal bodyguard. Now, that's what I call a pretty convoluted way to hire some security, don't you think? Anyway, so the second detail worth exploring is Coco's own son, Billy, whom he took along during his Cobra recruitment road trip across the US. Now, Billy has his own story to tell, but for now, I just want to focus on how Coco's relationship with his son leads him down quite the storied path. Billy first enters the scene as a pawn, manipulated by two of Coco's top lieutenants, Major Blood and the Baroness, who plan to use the boy to assassinate his own father. When the attempt fails, Coco reacts exactly as you'd expect from an evil dictator. He has his son tortured, showing not a shred of compassion. Fortunately, Billy is rescued by Storm Shadow, who takes him under his wing as his apprentice. Fast forward a few issues later, and Cobra Commander faces a familiar story beat, being replaced by the newly created Emperor, Serpentor. And during a full-scale assault on GI Joe's underground base, the Pit, in an effort to one-up Serpentor, Coco personally leads a contingent of Cobra forces right into the heart of the Pit, along with his weapons manufacturing pal Destro, and both end up getting buried alive under tons of rubble. The two manage to escape though, in style. I mean, can you check out those slick outfits? And by sheer chance, Coco learns what became of his son. Billy, it turns out, had been seriously injured in yet another car crash involving yet another drunk driver, and the Cobra operative scrap iron in his portable rocket launcher. While Billy survives, he loses his eye and a leg and is left in a coma. I know, it's serious. And speaking of serious, do you know how you can seriously help me and my channel out? Well, by watching more stories after this. Apparently, while liking, comments, subs, and shares are nice and most definitely welcome, it's actually extended watching time that really does the trick of keeping me in favor with the algorithm gods of YouTube. So if you have the time, sit back, chill, and binge watch my videos, or leave them playing in the background as you go about your day, yeah? But as always, whichever way you choose to help will be greatly appreciated, so thank you. Now back to the story. Reunited with his son and a Crimson Guardsman named Fred the Seventh, a tech genius who builds Billy a new leg and whips up a shiny new battlesuit for Coco, the commander seems to have a change of heart. Overcome with guilt for the pain that he's caused, he vows to leave the Cobra commanding life behind and focus on rebuilding his relationship with Billy. Aww, right? Well, not everyone saw it that way. Fred the Seventh, clearly not a fan of this new, softer side of the commander, snaps, shoots Coco in the back, buries him, and steals his armor to pose as the new Cobra Commander himself. Without missing a beat, Fred Mander takes the fight straight to Serpentor on Cobra Island, kicking off a full-blown Cobra civil war, which basically ends as abruptly as it begins, with Serpentor catching an arrow to the eye care of Zartan, leaving Fred free to rule Cobra unopposed. Until the real Cobra Commander returns. Turns out, Fred the Seventh's treachery hadn't gone unnoticed. Another Crimson Guardsman, you guessed it, Fred the Eighth, had been secretly watching the whole thing as per Cobra protocol. So when Fred the Seventh ran off to play Commander, Fred the Eighth busted out his shovel and dug up the real deal, literally bringing Coco back from the grave. So Coco, the real Cobra Commander, returns, and boy is he pissed. Apparently, being shot in the back and getting buried alive has a tendency to change a man significantly. Gone is the I want to turn over a new leaf and be a family man dude. And in his place is the let's gather up all the traitors in Cobra and bury them alive in a landlocked freighter underneath a volcano type of guy. And just like that, Fred the Seventh, Raptor, Crocmaster, Voltar, and Dr. Mindbender all meet their end. Slowly, painfully, from botulism. Poetic justice for Coco. And a convenient way for Hasbro to clean out characters who didn't have toys on shelves anymore. It's worth noting that Billy, his own son, along with Zartan and Firefly, were also among those buried, but they managed to escape. And with that, the real Cobra Commander was back on top, more ruthless and calculating than ever. And he'd stay that way, all the way up to the end of the original Marvel run. A few years later, a new company, Devil's Due, picked up right where Marvel left off, bringing back the ruthless, scheming Cobra Commander we all know, and I mean, let's admit it, kinda love. And man, did they give us some of his finest, most evil moments yet. But before we get to the really juicy stuff, let's hit some of his other highlights in no particular order. First off, Coco finds himself fighting off yet another Cobra coup, this time led by Destro, or so it seems. Turns out it's actually Destro's son, Alexander, trying to play the big bad in Daddy's silver mask. From there, Cobra Commander really ups his game. We're talking next level evil science, organic bioweapons, nanomites, you name it. He even goes full Mission Impossible, killing and impersonating the White House Chief of Staff just so he can sneak his own team of Cobra operatives, the Phoenix Guard, to replace GI Joe entirely. Not content with that, he decided to beat the Joes at their own game by forming his own elite unit called the Plague, made up of Cobra's most lethal soldiers. And through it all, he somehow survived the arrival of a third deadly faction known as the Red Shadows. Now, allow me to go off on a bit of a tangent here because the Red Shadows have a fascinating history themselves. They actually date back to the 1980s, where they served as the main villains of Action Force, the UK's version of GI Joe. The Red Shadows were a global terrorist army of brainwashed fanatics led by Baron Ironblood, a master strategist obsessed with world domination. But when the Red Shadows became too exposed, Ironblood betrayed them, leaking their locations and plans to the UN to ensure their annihilation, while faking his own death. He then vanished, only to resurface as Cobra Commander, a new identity built from Ironblood's ashes, and thus, Cobra was born. So even if this Devil's Due version of the Red Shadows was technically a reboot, it was still a neat callback to that original version's story, and honestly, the perfect reason for why they were so dead set on taking down old Coco once and for all. But I digress. Back to old Coco and his juiciest moments. For all the new and original twists that Devil's Due added to the GI Joe lore, they just couldn't resist bringing back a familiar face, the Cobra Emperor himself, Serpentor, whose return set off yet another Cobra Civil War, a war that new and improved Cobra Commander won for himself. In one of the most boss moments in all of Cobra history, the Commander completely outsmarts Serpentor with a booby-trapped helmet, then kicks him down a waterfall while declaring that the clone, made from the DNA of the world's greatest conquerors, was always missing one crucial strand. His. Mic dropped. Seriously, if you ask me, this is Cobra Commander's greatest line and one of his finest moments, period. But as epic as that was, it wasn't his most cold-blooded act. That title goes to what he did next. After his son Billy tries to assassinate him again, this time on his own free will, the Commander outsmarts him, poisons him, and watches as his son slowly and painfully dies at his feet. And if that wasn't enough, he has Billy's body strung up on a flagpole for all of Cobra to see. A brutal reminder that no one is safe from Cobra Commander's wrath. Cold-hearted snake indeed. Years later, another publisher, IDW, would bring back Larry Hama to continue his original Marvel run, effectively rendering all the Devil's Due stories non-canon. And while honestly I don't believe anything earth-shattering happened to Coco in this new continuity, it's worth noting that Hama dialed back the ruthlessness a little bit. His Cobra Commander was still cunning and dangerous, sure, but we also saw flashes of humanity, like moments of genuine grief over the loss of his son, who in this version also dies, but just not by his hand. What was interesting though was IDW's other take on Coco in their brand new continuity. See, this new Cobra Commander wasn't a used car salesman or an ancient mutated blue-skinned scientist. Nope. In the IDW universe, Cobra Commander was many men, a title passed down through the centuries, with each new leader chosen by a secret Cobra Council made up of elite financiers and power brokers who shaped the organization to fit their era and philosophy. The earliest known commander dated all the way back to the 14th century, the one who allegedly ordered the death of the poet Dante Alighieri to suppress the Divine Comedy, believing it exposed Cobra's hidden dealings. From there, Cobra's influence slithered through history, like a commander manipulating pirates in the 18th century, and another helping found the Yakuza during Japan's Edo period, weaving their mark through war, crime, and politics alike. In the present day, the modern Cobra Commander was a shadowy, calculating mastermind, a far cry from his over-the-top cartoon counterpart. Publicly, he played the part of a wealthy, high-profile businessman. Privately, he ruled Cobra from the shadows with cold, manipulative precision. His face remained hidden behind a familiar silver mask, this time detailed with fanged markings along the jawline. But as intriguing as this commander was, he wasn't long for this world. His downfall came from his own arrogance. When the GI Joe agent Chuckles infiltrates Cobra but ends up captured, the commander chooses not to execute him. Instead, he keeps Chuckles imprisoned in luxury on an island north of Japan, visiting him often, trying to corrupt his ideals and break his will. It's classic psychological warfare, with this commander valuing loyalty born of corruption over obedience through fear. Unfortunately for him, he underestimates the Undercover Joe's flower power, as Chuckles turns the tables, earns his trust, and ultimately, well, spoiler, ends him. The death of this commander sends the Cobra Council into chaos, triggering a deadly race to crown his successor. Familiar names like a creepier, non-clone version of Serpentor, Destro, Major Blood, the Baroness, and Tomax entered the fray, alongside newcomers like Dr. Vargas, Oda Satori, and Raja Calican. The rules were simple. Whoever killed the most Joes would become the new Cobra Commander. The resulting bloodbath, IDW's take on Cobra Civil War, resulted in the deaths of some of the most beloved Joes of the fandom, like Rat Race, Dead Check, Flakjack, Half Step, and Sand Crab. Just kidding. Just a bunch of Joe Red shirts made up to up the kill count of this contest. In the end, in what I consider a rather cop-out move, a new figure emerged victorious. A masked dude simply known as Crake, a brutal, intelligent former child soldier from Southeast Asia. Hey, represent! And a favorite of the former commander. Crake brought a very different vision to the role. While maybe not the most exciting or charismatic commander, Crake did make one major shift, turning Cobra from a secret network of profiteers into a full-blown military superpower. For the first time in forever, Cobra wasn't lurking in the shadows. They were out in the open, an empire-building force declaring full-blown war on the world. And that's where we leave Coco in the comics. True, there has been yet another intriguing and quite formidable version introduced in the newly minted Energon universe from Skybound Comics, but it's still rather raw, so I'll let that stew and flesh out a little longer. Besides, there's still a lot more Coco goodness to cover with an unexpected return to the animated world and eventually the live-action movies as well. First up is Cobra Commander from the short-lived series G.I. Joe Renegades, where he is reimagined as Adam the Cobra, a corporate magnate running Cobra Industries. This version combines intelligence and menace, favoring corporate manipulation and advanced technology such as bio-vipers and teleportation devices over direct confrontation. Honestly, nothing particularly too exciting about this guy if you ask me, and I can't say I'm a fan of this new half-mask design. On the other hand, the more mature and more violent micro-series G.I. Joe Resolute gives us a more traditional-looking commander that basically answered the question of, what if the commander from the OG Sunbow series was competent? What I find cool with this version is that he kinda sorta hints that he is the same dude from the original cartoon. He acknowledges that he was a buffoon and revealed that his former incompetence was merely a disguise to test the loyalty of his men. And right from the start, Major Blood discovers what happens to those who cross this commander, as his, bloody corpse with a snake-hilted dagger plunged into his chest is found at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial at the very start of the series. Oh, and just to drive home the point that this dude was a different animal, while the OG Coco would usually just make grand threats and often non-lethal displays of power, Resolute Coco straight up vaporized Moscow to show he wasn't dicking around. You know, come to think about it, maybe it's not a very good idea to call this guy Coco. Anyway, in 2009, we finally got to see Cobra Commander make the leap into live-action territory with G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra. Well, sorta. See, if the title didn't give it away, this was more of an origin story for the ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world. And so as such, we didn't outright get Cobra Commander. Instead, we are introduced to Rexford G. Lewis, or Rex, played by the actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt, a bright but reckless U.S. Army science officer and best friend of the hero of the story, Duke, and the brother of his fiancée, Anna. During a mission in East Africa, a premature airstrike leaves Rex presumed dead. However, he survives, but is scarred and mentally broken after being exposed to the experimental nanomites developed by Dr. Mindbender, who unfortunately does not rock his iconic shirtless, caped, mustachioed monocle look. Boo! But anyway, Rex adopts the identity of the Doctor and perfects Mindbender's research on nanomites. He also experiments on his own sister, binding her to the will of Cobra and turning her into, dun dun dun, the Baroness. At the end of the movie, in a twist that no one saw coming, Rex reveals himself to Duke and officially takes up the mantle of the Commander, with a final form that is, original? Well, anyway, a more traditional-looking Cobra Commander returns in the sequel, Retaliation, in 2013. And while Joseph Gordon-Levitt doesn't return, it is confirmed that this is still Rex. So yeah, nothing else to say about this dude, as he basically plays the role of your typical cliche bad guy who is ultimately defeated by the new poster boy of the live-action franchise, the Ninja Commando Roadblock, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Anyway, while Cobra Commander's live-action career may have fizzled out faster than a faulty Weather Dominator, his legacy on toy shelves is a whole different story. Because if there's one thing Hasbro never dropped the ball on, it was keeping Coco ever present in plastic form. And I'll be honest, there are quite a lot of them. Too much to cover individually, so I'm just gonna go over what I consider to be the most relevant ones of the bunch, starting out with the OG mail-away figure released in 1982. While this same figure would find its way to retail shelves in the following year, this original release is best known for having a poorly painted Cobra logo, often referred to as the Mickey Mouse variant. 1984 saw the release of another mail-away exclusive Cobra Commander that came in a darker shade of blue and donning what many consider to be an equally iconic look as his chrome-faced helmet, the hooded Cobra Commander, which was supposed to be his preferred ceremonial look, or for, when he was just Netflix and chilling back at his Cobra temple. As I can imagine, that chrome helmet could get hella hot. It's interesting to note though that while this hooded look was occasionally featured in the cartoon, it was slowly phased out once the decision was made to make Cobra Commander a blue-skinned Cobra-La scientist, as it would be quite difficult to explain his human-looking eyes showing under the hood. Plus, given his mutated multi-eyed face, I'd imagine it would have been more fitting to give him a hood that looked more like Charlie Brown's ghost costume from It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Anyway, the next significant Coco would be the Battle Armor version in 1987, which is a personal favorite of mine, as this was a delightfully unexpected Christmas gift for me back in the day. And after that failed experiment of Serpentor, this figure officially meant that my boy Coco was back. And these three looks, chrome, hooded, and battle armor, would be Coco's three iconic looks, if you ask me, and the only ones really worth talking about. Oh, okay, actually a fourth version released in 91 does deserve a mention because despite being sort of a variation of the face shield look, only this time trading in the chrome for blood red, could actually be unmasked, with a little extra effort that is. So yeah, presenting Cobra Commander's face. Yeah, like I said, three iconic looks. And when the line was once again given new life with the 25th anniversary, we basically got modern updates and variants of those three iconic versions, chrome, hooded, and battle armor. And what followed were even more modern, tweaked up versions of these guys for the live action movies and other recent takes like Renegades, Resolute, and oh yeah, the old Snake himself. And finally, we have the most recent versions from the 6-inch classified line, starting with a rather ornate modern take on the Commander's classic chrome-faced look that came in dark blue, a brighter royal blue, and black variants. As striking as that design was though, it just wasn't for me. I wanted a classic-looking Coco, which I first got with Super 7's slightly larger Ultimates figure, and thankfully later through the classified retro release with an actual reflective chromed out face. And for kicks, an exclusive Once a Man version as well. We'd eventually also get a classified Battle Armor Cobra Commander 2, complete with an iguanified Serpentor pack-in. But unfortunately, still no hooded Cobra Commander. Why? Because apparently, some geniuses at Hasbro decided that the hood looked a little too similar to, well, this. I mean, come on. Really? They actually think that we can't tell the difference between a rounded and pointy top or the colors blue and white? SMH. Talk about falling victim to today's overly sensitive standards. And speaking of which, do you think racially diverse characters like Spirit or Quick Kick would have even made it past today's so-called sensitivity checks? You can get my take in this story right here, or check out my latest video over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Go ahead and tell me your story. Cobra!